I'll never forget the moment my world crumbled. It was a gray Tuesday morning in October, when my Uncle Richard called to deliver news that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my future. My father had passed away suddenly from a heart attack while inspecting the North Fields, and I was still reeling from the loss of the man who had been my mentor, my hero, and my best friend. "We need to discuss your father's estate," Uncle Richard said, his voice carrying an odd mixture of sympathy and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Can you meet me at the farmhouse this afternoon?" I drove across the sprawling property that had been in our family for 3 generations, past fields of corn and soybeans that stretched to the horizon, past the state-of-the-art equipment barns and the prize-winning cattle operation that had made us one of the most successful agricultural enterprises in the state. The farm was worth $80 million, a testament to my father's vision and tireless work ethic. At 28, I had spent my entire adult life working alongside my father, learning every aspect of the operation from crop rotation to financial. We had talked extensively about the future, about sustainable farming practices, about expanding into organic certification. I thought I understood my place in that future. Uncle Richard was waiting in the farmhouse kitchen, a room where I'd eaten thousands of meals and made countless plans with my father. He looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes as he shuffled through a stack of legal documents. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this," he began, finally meeting my gaze. "But your father changed his will 6 months ago. He left everything to..." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Dad and I were partners. We were planning to expand the organic operation next year." Uncle Richard slid a document across the table. "I'm as surprised as you are, but it's all here in black and white. He apparently lost confidence in your ability to manage an operation of this size." I stared at the will, my father's signature stark at the bottom of the page. According to the document, he had indeed left the entire $80 million farm to his brother, citing concerns about my impractical ideas and lack of business acumen. "You'll get nothing from your father's farm," Uncle Richard said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I suggest you start making other plans." Chapter 2. Something doesn't add up. The days following that devastating meeting passed in a blur of grief and confusion. I couldn't reconcile the father I knew, the man who had encouraged my agricultural studies, who had praised my innovative approaches to sustainable farming, who had told me just weeks before his death how proud he was of my work, with the man who had supposedly written me out of his will. I moved through the farmhouse like a ghost, touching familiar objects and trying to make sense of what had happened. My father's office remained exactly as he'd left it, with agricultural journals stacked on his desk and photos of our prize-winning cattle covering the walls. Nothing suggested a man who had lost faith in his son's abilities. Uncle Richard had wasted no time asserting his ownership. He'd already met with the farm's management team and begun making changes to operations. His first decision was to cancel the organic certification process that my father and I had been working on for months, claiming it was financially irresponsible. "The old ways are the best ways," he told the staff during his first meeting. "We're going back to conventional farming methods that have proven profitable." I watched from the sidelines as Uncle Richard systematically dismantled everything my father and I had built together. The sustainable practices we'd implemented were abandoned, the environmental conservation programs were canceled, and several longtime employees were let go in the name of efficiency. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on. My father had been meticulous about documenting every decision, and maintaining detailed files on all aspects of the farm's operation. Yet when I asked to see his personal papers, Uncle Richard claimed they had been destroyed in accordance with the will's instructions. "Your father wanted a clean slate," he explained. "He didn't want you dwelling on the past or second-guessing his final decisions." But my father had never been one to destroy records. He believed in learning from history, in building on past successes and avoiding previous mistakes. The idea that he would order the destruction of decades of carefully maintained records seemed completely out of character. I began to suspect that Uncle Richard wasn't telling me the whole truth. My father had been a careful, thoughtful man who didn't make impulsive decisions. The will that disinherited me was dated just 6 months before his death, during a period when we had been working more closely together than ever before. I decided to conduct my own investigation, starting with a thorough search of the property for any documents or evidence that might shed light on my father's true intentions. Chapter 3. The search begins. I started my search in the farmhouse, going through every room with methodical precision. Uncle Richard had given me a week to collect my personal belongings before I had to vacate the property, so I used that time to look for anything that might explain the dramatic change in my father's will. The house yielded few clues. My father's bedroom had been cleaned out, his personal papers apparently removed according to Uncle Richard's instruction. The home office contained only business documents related to current operations, nothing that revealed my father's thoughts or intentions regarding the future of the farm. I expanded my search to the outbuild, starting with the equipment barns where my father had spent countless hours maintaining and upgrading our machinery. He had always been hands-on, preferring to understand every piece of equipment personally, rather than relying solely on hired mechanics. In the main equipment barn, I found his personal toolbox, the same red Craftsman box he'd carried for 30 years. Inside were the usual assortment of wrenches, screwdrivers, and specialty tools. But tucked into a side compartment was something unexpected, a small notebook filled with my father's handwriting. The notebook contained observations about various pieces of equipment, maintenance schedules, and efficiency notes. But scattered throughout were personal comments that gave me hope. Talked to Jake about the new irrigation system today. Read one entry from just 2 months before his death. His ideas for water conservation could save us thousands while improving yields. Proud of how he thinks about long-term sustainability. Another entry, dated 3 weeks before his death, was even more encouraging. Jake's organic certification plan is solid. Need to make sure he has full authority to implement it after I'm gone. This farm's future depends on adapting to changing markets and environmental concerns. These entries painted a picture of a father who was not only confident in my abilities, but actively planning for my leadership of the farm. They directly contradicted the will that Uncle Richard had presented, which claimed my father had lost faith in my impractical ideas. I photographed every page of the notebook with my phone, creating a digital record of my father's true feelings about my work and our shared vision for the farm's future. The evidence was compelling, but I knew it wouldn't be enough to challenge the will in court. I needed something more concrete, something that would prove Uncle Richard's document was either forged or superseded by a later will. Chapter 4. Following Dad's Trail. I decided to retrace my father's daily routines, visiting all the places where he might have hidden important documents or left clues about his true intention. My father had been a private man who valued security, and I suspected that if he had created a second will or left instructions about the farm's future, he would have hidden them somewhere safe but accessible. The first stop was the old oak tree at the center of the property, a massive specimen that had been there when my great-grandfather first bought the land. My father often sat beneath its branches during his lunch break, using the shade to review reports. I searched the area thoroughly, but found nothing except the carved initials of 3 generations of our family. Next, I checked the small fishing pond where my father liked to think through difficult decisions. He had always said that the quiet water helped him focus, and some of his best business ideas had come to him while sitting on the weathered wooden dock. Again, I found nothing but memories of the countless conversations we'd had in that peaceful spot. The equipment maintenance shop was another of my father's refuges. He had built it himself 20 years ago, creating a space where he could work on machinery and think without interruption. I went through every toolbox, every storage cabinet, every possible hiding place, but came up empty-handed. As the sun began to set on my 3rd day of searching, I found myself standing in the doorway of the old hay barn, the original structure that my great-grandfather had built when he first established the farm. The barn was no longer used for hay storage. We had newer, more efficient buildings for that purpose, but my father had kept it maintained out of respect for family history. The barn held special significance for both of us. It was where my father had taught me to drive a tractor, where we had worked together on countless projects, where he had shared stories about his own father and grandfather. If my father had wanted to leave me a message, this would be the perfect place to hide it. The building was massive, with a soaring roof supported by hand-hewn beams and a loft that stretched the entire length of the structure. Searching it thoroughly would take hours, but I had nowhere else to be and nothing else to lose. I started with the ground floor, checking every stall, every corner, every piece of old equipment that had been stored there over the decade. The work was dusty and exhausting, but I pressed on, driven by the conviction that my father wouldn't have abandoned me without explanation. Chapter 5. The Discovery. By midnight, I had searched most of the barn's ground floor without finding anything significant. My clothes were covered in dust, my hands were scratched from moving old equipment, and my hope was beginning to fade. But something kept me going, a stubborn belief that my father had left me a way to fight back against Uncle Richard's betrayal. I climbed the ladder to the hayloft, a space I hadn't visited in years. The loft was filled with remnants of the barn's working past. Old hay bales, farming tools that had been retired decades ago, and furniture that had been stored and forgotten. Moonlight streamed through the gaps between the boards, creating patterns of light and shadow across the dusty floor. I worked my way systematically through the loft, moving aside old equipment and checking behind stored items. Near the far end of the building, I found a section that looked different from the rest. The floorboards were slightly newer, and there were subtle scratches around the edges that suggested they had been removed and replaced relatively recently. My heart began to race as I examined the boards more closely. Using a crowbar I'd found among the old tools, I carefully pried up the planks, revealing a hidden compartment beneath the floor. Inside was a metal document box, the kind used to protect important papers from fire and moisture. The box was locked, but I recognized it immediately. It was the same type of security box my father had used in his office for the most important farm document. I had seen him access it countless times over the years, and I knew he kept the key on his personal keychain. I raced back to the farmhouse, my mind spinning with possibilities. Uncle Richard had given me my father's personal effects, including his keychain, claiming they had no value beyond sentimental attachment. At the time, I had been too grief-stricken to pay much attention to the keys, but now they might be the key to everything. I found the keychain in the box of personal items I'd packed. Among the familiar keys for trucks, equipment, and buildings was a small brass key that I'd never paid attention to before. My hands trembled as I returned to the barn and inserted the key into the document box's lock. The key turned smoothly, and the box opened with a soft click. Inside were several manila folders, each labeled in my father's careful handwriting. The first folder contained copies of financial documents and business plans that I'd seen before, but the second folder made my breath catch in my throat. It was labeled Last Will and Testament, Final Version, and dated just 2 weeks before my father's death. This was 3.5 months after the will that Uncle Richard had presented, which meant this document would supersede the earlier version if it was legitimate. Chapter 6. The Real Will. With shaking hands, I opened the folder and began to read the document that would change everything. The will was written in my father's handwriting, witnessed by 2 signatures I recognized: Dr. Peterson, our family physician, and Martha Williams, our longtime accountant. Both were respected members of the community whose testimony would be unquestionable in court. The document was clear and unambiguous. My father left the entire farm operation to me, along with detailed instructions about his vision for its future. But more than that, the will contained explanations that revealed the depth of his planning and the extent of Uncle Richard's deception. To my son, the will, who has shown through his dedication and innovation that he understands not just the business of farming, but its soul. I leave to him the land that has sustained our family for 3 generations, confident that he will preserve its legacy while adapting to the challenges of a changing world. The will went on to specify that Uncle Richard was to receive a substantial cash settlement, $5 million, but no ownership stake in the farm itself. My father had anticipated potential family conflict and had included a clause explaining his reasoning. But the most shocking revelation came in a personal letter that was attached to the will. In it, my father detailed his growing suspicions about Uncle Richard's motives and behavior. "I have become concerned about Richard's recent interest in the farm's finances," my father had written. "He has been asking detailed questions about our assets and has suggested several times that we should consider selling portions of the property for development. I believe he sees the farm primarily as a financial asset rather than a family legacy to be preserved." The letter went on to describe specific incidents that had raised my father's suspicions, including Uncle Richard's attempts to access financial records, and his suggestions about modernizing the operation in ways that would maximize short-term profits at the expense of long-term sustainability. "I fear that Richard may attempt to challenge my will or manipulate the inheritance process," my father had written. "Therefore, I am creating this second will and hiding it in a place where only my son will think to look. If he is reading this, it means my fears were justified." The final paragraph of the letter brought tears to my eyes. "To my son, if you are reading this, know that I never doubted your abilities or your commitment to our family's legacy. You are the future of this farm, and I trust you to build something even greater than what we have accomplished together." I sat in that dusty barn lot, holding the proof of my father's true intentions and feeling a mixture of vindication and rage. Chapter 7. Building my case. I spent the rest of the night in the barn, reading through every document in the hidden box and planning my next moves. In addition to the will and personal letter, my father had included detailed financial records, business plans, and even a list of trusted advisors who could help me navigate the legal challenges ahead. Among the most valuable documents was a letter addressed to Martha Williams, our family accountant, instructing her to assist me in any legal proceedings related to the estate. My father had apparently discussed his concerns with Martha and had asked her to be prepared to testify about the authenticity of his final will. As dawn broke over the farm, I carefully photographed every document with my phone, creating digital backups before securing the originals in a safe deposit box at the bank. I had learned from my father's example about the importance of protecting crucial documents. My first stop was Martha Williams' office. She was a woman in her 60s who had handled our family's finance over 20 years, and I knew she could be trusted to give me honest advice about the legal implications of my discovery. Martha's reaction to seeing the second will was immediate and decisive. "I've been wondering when you would find this," she said, examining the document carefully. "Your father told me he was creating a backup plan, but he didn't tell me where he was hiding it. So, you knew about Uncle Richard's deception?" "I suspected something was wrong when Richard presented that first will," Martha replied. The language didn't sound like your father, and the timing seemed suspicious. Your father had been talking for months about expanding your role in the operation, not reducing it. Martha explained that she had been present when my father signed the second will, along with Dr. Peterson. Both of them could testify to its authenticity and to my father's mental state at the time of signing. Your father was completely lucid and determined, Martha said. He specifically mentioned his concerns about Richard's motives and his desire to ensure that you inherited the farm intact. We spent the morning developing a legal strategy. Martha recommended a probate attorney who specialized in contested wills, and we scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. The attorney, James Morrison, had a reputation for being both thorough and aggressive when representing clients in inheritance disputes. Morrison's initial assessment was encouraging. This second will clearly supersedes the earlier document, he said after reviewing the evidence. The question is whether your uncle will challenge its authenticity or try to claim that your father wasn't competent when he signed it. What are our chances? Very good, given the quality of the witnesses and the detailed documentation your father provided. But be prepared for a fight. Your uncle has a lot to lose, and people don't give up $80 million easily. Chapter 8. The Confrontation. I decided to confront Uncle Richard directly before filing any legal papers. I wanted to give him a chance to do the right thing, and I was curious to see how he would react when faced with evidence of his deception. I found him in my father's old office, sitting behind the desk, as if he had always belonged there. He was meeting with a real estate developer, discussing plans to subdivide portions of the farm for residential development. The conversation I overheard confirmed my father's worst fears about Uncle Richard's intention. We could easily get approval for a 100-unit subdivision on the south section, the developer was saying. The land is perfect for high-end homes, and you'd be looking at a profit of at least $20 million. Uncle Richard looked up as I entered the office, his expression shifting from annoyance to concern as he saw the folder in my hands. I thought you were supposed to be packing, he said, dismissing the developer with a wave of his hand. You need to be out of here by tomorrow. Actually, I think there's been a misunderstanding, I replied, setting the folder on the desk. I found something in the barn that I think you should see. Uncle Richard's face went pale as I opened the folder and revealed my father's final will. He picked up the document with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the pages with growing alarm. This is impossible, he said finally. Your father destroyed all his old papers. I saw him do it. Apparently, he was more careful than you thought, I replied. This will is dated 2 weeks before his death, which makes it the controlling document. It's witnessed by Dr. Peterson and Martha Williams, both of whom are prepared to testify to its authenticity. Uncle Richard's composure cracked completely. You don't understand the pressure I was under, he said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. I have debts, obligations. I needed this farm to survive financially. So you forged a will? I didn't forge anything, he protested. That first will was real. Your father did write it, but he was angry with you at the time. You'd had an argument about the organic certification costs. I remembered the argument he was referring to. My father and I had disagreed about the timeline for organic certification, with him wanting to move more slowly and me pushing for faster implementation. But it had been a minor disagreement, resolved within days. One argument doesn't justify disinheriting me, I said, and it certainly doesn't explain why you hid the existence of this later will. Uncle Richard slumped in his chair, the fight going out of him. I found that second will when I was going through his papers after the funeral. I knew it would override the first one, so I hid it. Chapter 9. Legal Victory. The legal proceedings moved quickly once we filed the petition to probate my father's true will. Uncle Richard's attorney tried to challenge the document's authenticity, but the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Peterson and Martha Williams both testified that they had witnessed my father sign the will and that he had been completely competent at the time. The handwriting analysis confirmed that the will was written entirely in my father's hand, and the paper and ink were consistent with documents he had created around the same time period. Most damaging to Uncle Richard's case was his own admission that he had found and hidden the second will. Your uncle's actions demonstrate a clear intent to defraud the estate, Judge Harrison said during the final hearing. By concealing the existence of a later will, he attempted to subvert your father's true intentions and deprive the rightful heir of his inheritance. The judge ruled that my father's final will was valid and controlling, which meant that I inherited the entire farm operation as he had intended. Uncle Richard was ordered to return all assets he had taken control of and to pay my legal fees. But the victory felt hollow. The legal battle had taken 3 months, during which Uncle Richard had made significant changes to the farm's operations. He had canceled contracts with organic suppliers, sold off some of our prize breeding cattle, and fired several key employees who had disagreed with his management style. The damage to our relationships with longtime customers and suppliers would take years to repair. Some of the sustainable farming practices my father and I had implemented were completely dismantled, and it would require significant investment to restore them. Uncle Richard left the farm immediately after the court ruling, but not before making one final attempt to justify his actions. "You'll regret this," he told me as he packed his belongings. "This farm will bankrupt you within 5 years. You don't have the business sense to manage an operation this size." "Maybe not," I replied, "but I have something you never had. Respect for what this place represents and commitment to preserving it for future generations." As Uncle Richard drove away, I felt a mixture of relief and determination. I had won back my inheritance, but now I had to prove that my father's faith in me was justified. The first step was rebuilding the team. I reached out to the employees Uncle Richard had fired, offering them their jobs back with apologies for the disruption. Most of them returned, grateful to be working for someone who shared their commitment to sustainable agriculture. Next, I began the process of restoring the organic certification program that Uncle Richard had canceled. It would take time and money, but I was determined to honor my father's vision for the farm's future. Chapter 10. Rebuilding and Growing. The months following my legal victory were among the most challenging of my life. Uncle Richard had left the farm's operations in disarray, and I had to work 18-hour days to restore stability and rebuild relationships with customers and suppliers. The financial situation was more precarious than I had initially realized. Uncle Richard had taken out several loans against the farm's assets to fund his lifestyle, and these debts had to be addressed immediately. I was forced to sell some equipment and lease back land that we had previously owned outright, but I managed to avoid the bankruptcy that Uncle Richard had predicted. The restoration of our organic certification program became my top priority. I hired a consultant who specialized in sustainable agriculture transitions, and we developed a comprehensive plan to rebuild our soil health and eliminate all traces of the chemical inputs that Uncle Richard had reintroduced. The process was expensive and time-consuming, but it was essential for the farm's long-term viability. Consumer demand for organic products was growing rapidly, and I knew that our future profitability depended on positioning ourselves as leaders in sustainable agriculture. I also began implementing some of the innovative ideas that my father and I had discussed before his death. We installed a state-of-the-art irrigation system that reduced water usage by 30% while improving crop yield. We built a new processing facility that allowed us to add value to our products before selling them to consumers. Perhaps most importantly, I established a scholarship program in my father's name, providing financial assistance to young people who wanted to study sustainable agriculture. The program was funded by a portion of the farm's profits, and it reflected my father's belief that education was the key to agriculture's future. The scholarship recipients often came to work on the farm during their summer breaks, bringing fresh ideas and enthusiasm that energized our entire operation. Their presence reminded me daily of why I was fighting so hard to preserve and improve what my father had built. One of the most rewarding aspects of rebuilding the farm was reconnecting with our local community. Uncle Richard had alienated many of our neighbors with his aggressive business practices and his dismissive attitude toward environmental concern. I made it a priority to repair these relationships and to position our farm as a good neighbor and community partner. We began hosting educational tours for local schools, teaching children about sustainable farming practices and the importance of environmental stewardship. We partnered with the County Extension Office to provide training programs for other farmers who wanted to transition to organic method. The farm also became a research site for the State University's Agriculture Department, hosting studies on soil health, water conservation, and integrated pest management. Chapter 11. Personal Growth. As the farm's operations stabilized and began to thrive, I found myself with time to reflect on the personal lessons I had learned from the inheritance battle. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about family dynamics, the importance of clear communication, and the need to protect what matters most. I also realized that I had been so focused on work that I had neglected my personal life. At 30 years old, I was successful but lonely, with few relationships outside of the farming community. My father's death and the subsequent legal battle had made me acutely aware of how quickly life could change and how important it was to build meaningful connections with others. I began making an effort to expand my social circle, joining community organizations and attending events that weren't directly related to farming. It was at a charity fundraiser for the local hospital that I met Sarah, a veterinarian who had recently moved to the area to start her own practice. Sarah was intelligent, compassionate, and shared my commitment to environmental stewardship. She understood the demands of agricultural life because she worked closely with farmers throughout the region. But she also brought a fresh perspective that challenged me to think beyond the boundaries of my own operation. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than just physical attraction. Sarah appreciated the work I was doing to restore the farm's environmental practices, and I admired her dedication to animal welfare and her skill as a veterinarian. When I told her the story of my inheritance battle and the discovery of my father's hidden will, she was fascinated by the family dynamics involved. "Your uncle's actions were inexcusable," she said, "but I think the experience made you stronger and more determined to succeed." She was right. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also clarified my priorities and strengthened my resolve to honor my father's legacy. I was no longer the naive young man who had assumed that family loyalty would protect me from deception. I had learned to be more careful about trusting others, but also more appreciative of those who proved themselves worthy of trust. Sarah became one of those trusted people. She provided veterinary services for our livestock, but more importantly, she became my closest advisor and confidant. Her insights helped me make better decisions about the farm's operations, and her emotional support sustained me through the inevitable challenges of running a complex agricultural business. As our relationship deepened, I began to envision a future that included not just the farm's success, but also the possibility of building a family and creating new traditions that would honor the past while embracing the future. We married 2 years later in a ceremony held on the farm, surrounded by family, friends, and colleagues from the agricultural community. Chapter 12. Legacy Secured. 5 years have passed since that devastating day when Uncle Richard told me I would get nothing from my father's farm. As I write this, I'm sitting in my father's old office, but the room has been transformed to reflect my own vision and priority. The walls are covered with photos of our sustainable farming practices, certificates from environmental organizations, and awards recognizing our contributions to agricultural innovation. The farm has become a model for sustainable agriculture, hosting visitors from around the world who come to learn about our methods and see proof that environmental stewardship and profitability can go hand in hand. We've been featured in agricultural journals, environmental magazines, and even a documentary about the future of farming. Our financial success has exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The farm is now worth over $100 million, a 25% increase from its value when I inherited it. More importantly, we've achieved this growth while actually improving the land's environmental health and productivity. Sarah and I are expecting our first child in the fall, a development that has given new meaning to my commitment to preserving the farm for future generations. I find myself thinking often about my father's words in his hidden letter, about the importance of being a steward of something precious rather than just an owner of valuable assets. The baby will grow up on the same land where I learned to love agriculture, but in a world that is rapidly changing. Climate change, evolving consumer preferences, and new technologies are creating both challenges and opportunities that my father could never have imagined. The hidden will that I found in the barn changed more than just my financial circumstances. It taught me the importance of fighting for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. It showed me that truth has a way of surfacing, even when powerful people try to bury it. Most importantly, it reinforced my father's belief that the land is not just an asset to be exploited, but a trust to be preserved and improved for future generations. Every decision I make is guided by that principle, and every success we achieve honors his memory and vision. The barn where I found the will has become a symbol of hope and perseverance for our family. We've preserved the loft exactly as it was when I discovered the hidden compartment, and I sometimes bring visitors there to tell the story of how a father's foresight and love saved his family's legacy. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't found that second will. If Uncle Richard's deception had succeeded, the farm would probably have been sold and developed, the land lost forever to our family and to agriculture. Instead, it stands as proof that integrity and perseverance can triumph over greed and deception. The story of the hidden will has become part of our family's oral history, a reminder that the most important things in life are worth fighting for, and that sometimes the truth is hidden in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone with enough determination to find it.